Now we're going to talk a little bit about shelters. So this question is for you, JoLyn. So despite the focus on increasing shelter capacity within San Joaquin County, we know that this is not an adequate solution toward getting people permanently housed. Additionally, many unhoused individuals choose not to go to temporary shelters where because they will be separated from their pets, partners, possessions, or lose their things. Lose their things, their autonomy, and their privacy. What is your vision for eradicating homelessness, and how do we see shelters engage in that process?
Okay, I guess I'll take the first shot at that one. The first thing I want to say is we have been involved in housing since 1986. So we have been, because we are solely funded through contracts and we rely heavily on philanthropy, we can only do as much as that funding allows us to do. But within that, we have worked hard for the past 2 years to put ourselves in a position that when the HAP funding came out, that we had a plan for expansion that was ready to go. So in the next couple months, you will see us breaking ground on a massive expansion on grounds at the Stockton shelter. It's going to almost double the capacity of our shelter. There will be navigation services included in that and more case managers and social workers to help deal with that. I'm going to be honest, our budget is about $2 million a year. And so we operate on a shoestring and a paperclip, never having the funding that we really need to do our jobs adequately. So we do what we can with what we have. Looking forward to our expansion. I think another thing that the shelter has done is seen several years ago, and I can thank Adam for this. Thank you, Adam. And Fred over here, seen several years ago that we were in a housing crisis. STAND, Housing Authority, CIVLIC, which is Central Valley Low-Income Housing, and the Stockton Shelter, ventured out into a partnership with low-income housing. So about a month ago, we did a ribbon cutting on that. And as a result of about $3 or $4 million, probably more than I know now, but which was a HEAP grant for housing, we were able to open 13 units of low-income housing that is supportive.
The term homeless is a politically charged word. I prefer a continuum of housing challenged people. And that starts with people who might have missed a monthly rent payment or two. It involves people who might be doubling up or tripling up with family members. It includes people who are couch surfing. It's more of a McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. I was an educator for 38 years, so McKinney-Vento is ground into my brain regarding how we define homelessness in our school community. So I think when you're addressing homelessness, by definition, you have to look at all of those levels of the continuum. Our eviction moratorium and our rent cap are so important to us because we know how exponentially our unhoused population can become if we don't address those other areas as well.
I actually agree with Dan on the continuum piece of homelessness. See, the people that have missed a couple rent payments, they're the easiest on the continuum and the least expensive to help. So if we intervened at that point, we wouldn't be dealing as directly with everything we deal with at the most expensive end of the continuum, which would be maybe HUD's definition of chronic homelessness, right? Been homeless for more than a year, a couple other things. So that's the most expensive kind of homelessness to address. So I actually like your explanation, Dan, because I think it allows us to talk about how we can intervene in multiple areas at variable costs to interrupt the cycle into homelessness. So I actually concur with Dan on that.
10 months ago, I was in San Francisco at Amoeba Records. I'm a audiophile, right? I just like to pick up a lot of music every now and then. So I'll make my way over to Amoeba or down to Rasputin and Modesto every 2 months or so. And I couldn't park in their parking lot because they had instituted a safe camping site in the parking lot right outside of Amoeba Records. And so I immediately started to do a little research on it and say, what's going on here? So I've learned quite a bit about San Francisco's model. What they do is they identify potential sites for affordable housing. But as we've already discussed today, that process is a long process. And it can take, sometimes up to 10 years to actually get something built. Hopefully less. But what San Francisco has done, so we know we're going to build affordable housing here. Let's take this spot here. Let's make it a safe camping site or a safe parking site until such time that we're ready to break ground and build more housing.
Honestly, we'd probably have more success and find a better place to put something like this by recognizing maybe some areas even near our services that are just vacant, privately owned spots, where the cost of the city for a land lease wouldn't be significant, and it's just a matter of doing exactly what Councilmember Wright said, and that's getting services, water, electricity, security, and things like that out. So one of the challenges that we heard from staff is that they're having a hard time even identifying those type of things. So I'd encourage if anyone even has contact, might have vacant lots here in the community, especially when they're close to resources like the Stockton Homeless Shelter or St. Mary's, identifying these spots where we can be partners can expedite this process. So to me, it would help if we could get some people to say, hey, I have an acre, this is a perfect site, and I'll do a ground lease to you guys for 2 years or 3 years, which would fit within the ARPA funding schedule. I think it's 3 years. And we can make something happen until we can get some of these units built where we're 18 months out or 2 years out. So I think it's not just thinking about public land, but it's also trying to identify maybe private land. And we're the government. We're not trying to force anything on somebody. We really need somebody, a property owner, to step up to the city and say, hey, I have somewhere that might fit what you guys are looking for. What can we do? And I think that's how we solve this. It's not just government's way of trying to solve problems, but it's the community and government working together.
Currently, do you guys have something in place at your shelter that would provide a pathway for the people who are staying there to access affordable housing? And if there is more affordable housing built, would that, help in getting the people who are staying at your shelter into permanent housing?
So the short answer is yes to everything. The shelter's under-resourced. We have one case manager for about 150 men. We use a room renting model. He's rehabbing houses and renting the rooms out into the houses. That's an affordable model for these single men who have limited income. So that's a model for me that I'm going to promote left and right, because that's the housing that at least 50 or 60% of my men who have income can't get right now. Okay? We also just hired that social worker coming up on 2 years ago now. So up until 2 years ago, we couldn't afford a case manager to get men out of the shelter.
One of the issues that comes up, and it was talked about in the question, is this idea of a housing trust fund. Councilmember Jobrack spoke a little bit earlier about how difficult it was to cobble together the necessary funding to build affordable housing. And one of the very easy answers to that is creation of a housing trust fund. Now, I sit on our regional REAP committee. It's studying the issue of affordable housing in the Central Valley. And so we've had people from the California Department of Housing attend our meetings. They're at almost every meeting. It's rare when they're not there. And it is a broken record to them. Fund a trust fund. Okay, I bring it up at the League of California Cities. I bring it up when we take advocacy trips to Washington, D.C. I bring it up when we take advocacy trips to Sacramento. When I have personal conversations with Jerry McNerney and Susan Eggman and Carlos Villaputua, this comes up. Is that we have to fund a housing trust fund so that when those opportunities to build affordable housing come up, we can do the job, and we can do it in an efficient time frame.
So one of the things that this council and the city manager is focusing on is applying a performance metric. So when we allocate you some of these HEAP funds or these things and you sit on those funds for a decade, we want to make sure we're getting the money into the hands of the people who are going to be building units and building units quick. So these are some of the things that I know we're talking about incorporating into our upcoming affordable housing, the fund allocations for the projects that are coming up. It's like, hey, we want to do A, B, C, and D. By this time, we're going to be done with this, and by this time, we're going to be done with this. And then when the project's underway, if they're not meeting those, like, I'm going to have a hard time at the next council meeting saying, let's give them another, chunk of money. So we really need to start holding the people we're giving money to accountable to spend those monies, because we keep talking about those are government monies, those are the public's monies, and sitting on them and not building the units to which we think are going to happen. Nothing, I can tell you, I've been on the council for 3 years, and nothing's more frustrating as a council member than you allocate funds to something, and here you are 3 years later, and you're like, I'm waiting for the groundbreaking.
That in order to get these things done, you really only need two things: resources and political will. We have had the resources, and today we have more resources than we ever have. You're talking about ARPA and these other sources. That's creating some opportunities that we are really trying to take advantage of. It's the political will piece that we haven't gotten to. At the end of the day, housing solves homelessness. We can talk about the other issues that lead to homelessness all day, and that's fine. That's valid. But housing solves homelessness. So the idea that we can create a resource for affordable housing developers to pull from that allows them to support the development, that's, if it's going to create more units, it's going to be a benefit to this community. In California, in the state of California, it typically takes 7 or 8 layers of funding in order to complete the capital stack, the total funding for an affordable housing project, as opposed to about 2 or 3, depending on what other state you're in. The article I read compared it to the South. Each one of those layers of funding adds a cost, right? Because remember, public funds and that complexity that happens, and lawyers and everything get involved. That's the reality of affordable housing development in California. So if we can create a place where we can put these funds and say, as a community, and I think the COG is a really great platform for that, because it's already this thing that is kind of bringing all these elected officials together to kind of have these conversations. If we can create that and really jump off from that, I think we're going to get there. The political will piece has really been accelerated by folks like the Housing Justice Coalition and a lot of other advocates that are saying, hey, other communities are doing this. We can do it too, right? We go, well, we've been, folks like us have been talking about it for years, and we haven't quite got there yet, but I think keeping that pressure up is a great way to get us over that hump.
So let's talk about home ownership opportunities. Housing prices in Stockton, well, really all over the country, but let's focus on Stockton. Housing prices in Stockton and San Joaquin County have seen a significant increase since 2019. Are there any plans to right-size existing down payment assistance programs? What other programs, for example, credit repair, rent-to-own programs, do you support to assist residents in achieving home ownership?
Some of the things that we talked about at our council meeting was, we identified like this program helping out Stocktonians. So we want to make sure, one of the things that we can all recognize is that there's quite a migration into the community of Stockton, and what that often happens with that is it often results in some of the issues that we're dealing with. It drives up the housing costs, and you factor that with a lack of inventory, and these issues start to compound on themselves, and that's what we're trying to figure out how we mitigate that. And one of the things that in this program that the council had brought up was making sure that for first-time homebuyers, we try to identify Stocktonians, who've been here, who are trying to buy a home, and make sure we get them taken care of. So I know Joaquin's currently working on trying to work on fix that program because it wasn't as successful as we'd hoped. And it's been here for a while, but I think we've allocated even more funds to it.
With our
I'd like to say something that has complicated the displacement and what we're seeing really blossom now. When COVID started, there was a decision made to stop displacing the encampments because we didn't know what would happen once it got into the unsheltered homeless population. So what you're seeing today, or 6 months ago, 3 months ago, is the result of everything being put on hold for about a year so that we weren't mixing up camps. We're dispersing encampments now, and for the first time in the past month, we're having positives come through the unsheltered population. But now that we're stirring camps, my medical model at the shelter, half the people coming in that are unsheltered are currently testing positive for COVID. So, and they're doing outreach in the encampments and testing and vaccinating in the encampments. But the unsheltered situation right now is a very complicated situation due to COVID. And there was a medical reason that we didn't insure encampments for a year. And now what you're seeing out there is a lot of really entrenched people that don't want to come into the shelters now because they're so entrenched. I don't know, have some of you seen those 2-story houses that they're building? And, you know, they're getting really entrenched. So the outreach work becomes more difficult as a result of the pandemic.
While our priorities are to engage and do these type of things, we're bound and limited by what our budget is. And I think that I can't speak for the county, but I can at least speak for the city, in that, you know, we're trying to stretch a dollar wherever we can. And we go through our general fund every year. We go through our budgets every year, and at least to me, it doesn't appear as though we're being very wasteful. I think we're being very efficient with the funds that we have. And I think this goes back to, there have been efforts across all spectrums here in the community to try to bring things like a university to the community, higher paying jobs to the community. And it's those type of things that can help foster and create an environment for us to then increase revenues down the road so that we can have exactly what we're talking about.
One of the things we've determined is that it's easier to provide behavioral health services. It's easier to provide most of the non-housing related services when people are in a housed situation. You have your access to them because they're spending their evenings at home. You don't have to go searching for them. You may have to, even if you know the person and you know what their needs are, you may have to visit 5, 6, 7 different camps to find them, you know, to be able to continue to provide those services to them. That's why the sheltering and the housing and the safe camping and parking issues are critical. Let's get them in a stable situation so we can begin to provide the services that will help them exit the situation they find themselves in.
The strategy of the county, and is it adequate? No, of course not. And certainly the county would be the first to say that. And the folks I work with, behavioral health, you know, absolutely. The strategy that the county is engaged in is creating places for people to go. So as an example, a partnership with the Housing Authority to convert their old headquarters, which is very close to here, into 37 units of supportive housing for mental health clients. Creating places for people to go after they're done with treatment so that they don't go back out on the streets and decompensate is a key strategy and an essential strategy. Is it difficult to create this housing? Is it lengthy to do? Is it expensive potentially? Yes. What's the alternative? And we all can answer that question. So, you know, just again, the more that we can focus on the development of permanent supportive housing of all kinds, in order to get that asking price of a single family home down, or to find places for people to go so they don't decompensate after they've gone through behavioral health, the closer we will get to functional zero on homelessness in this community.
This funding supports the creation of permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. It requires the units be available within 8 months of the funding award, which is an incredible turnaround time. The program NOFA was open at the end of September, and there are incentives for submitting applications by January 22nd. What are the plans? What are there for the city or county to pursue these funds?
You've been watching council meetings, you know that Project Home Key is something I've been talking a lot about, so.
Yeah.
And very animated about. So, you know, I think it's, once again, our staff, Carrie, Director Wright, she has a lot on her plate. And I think there are a lot of nuances to Home Key from what I can tell. And there's a lot of fear at the local level, and probably I would think from at the developer level with the tight timeline in which the state has said these funds have to be used. We're going to have about $9 million. You know, the approach I want to try is, instead of saying bring us a project, us say we're going to give X dollars per door. And we probably haven't got as many projects or interests. There's one right now, from what I understand, but we haven't got as much interest. And I think personally because people who are in that realm probably want a bigger commitment from the city up front.
We're going to come together and support these projects. We want to bring these tax dollars, and there are tax dollars, by the way, right? Because when we pay taxes to the state, they use it to fund programs like this. We need to bring these back to the county. And so when the county invests $10 million to create a $40 million potentially project and bring $30 million extra dollars in Home Key money, potentially, you know, I think that's a pretty goddamn good return on investment. And so how do we make that happen over and over and over again? Well, it's with this commitment of resources, with the skin in the game.
When Mayor Lincoln was elected, homelessness was a priority for him. He spoke about it in his campaign, and upon election said that it was going to be his top priority. So he established a committee with the Continuum of Care and the county to work on solutions. That idea in itself was a good idea. The projects in Tracy, Lodi, and Manteca were smaller projects, and they got funded, and they will do well. So I think I spoke with the county administrator today about this very issue, and he said the money's still there. Bring us an idea forward, and we'll work with you. We've got money. And we've got money for Stockton, is what he told me. I don't think I'm telling stories out of school. I think he would he would repeat this as well. So it's imperative that we go back to the table and develop a project. And he's told me he's already been in discussions with the mayor, so hopefully we will be, as a council, be discussing this again very, very soon. And maybe it's a Home Key partnership, maybe it's something else, but we will. The key is to continue to put units out there that people can be housed in. Housing ends homelessness. And so as we're informing this process, you know, attend city council meetings, give us your input, or just email our economic development department. It's economicdevelopment@stocktonca.gov. You know, it's the feedback is important. As I said, I think that first attempt was unsuccessful because of the lack of inputs. We need as many inputs as possible. And when we talk about, you know, putting projects in council districts, the inputs are extremely important there. You know, so let's provide the inputs, make sure it's reflective of our entire community.